You are listening to The Upside of Down with Dan Ariely.
So we've talked to lots of people with really terrible injuries about their own lives. You know, what I find is that when people with difficult injuries call me, or when I talk to them, or sometimes when we spend a day with somebody for these interviews, it is very painful. It's emotionally draining. It's sad. It stays with me. It's just a very complex, sad day to spend a day with somebody who's a paraplegic, for example, or somebody who lost their eyesight. I mean, all these challenges, and to learn all the little difficult things about their lives. It's just a very painful way to spend a day, and it stays with me. And nevertheless, I choose to keep on doing this.
Hi, I'm Robin Eldridge, creator of the show. And in this final episode, our host Dan speaks with a fellow social psychologist, Paul Bloom, an author and professor now at the University of Toronto, but at the time of this conversation, he was at Yale. If you've been listening to the series, you've heard the other conversations Dan's had with guests who, like himself, have been through difficult times. They've shared about physical disabilities they've had since birth, or the injuries and challenges they've faced later in life. Each has tried to integrate what has happened to them into the process of trying to find happiness, and in Dan's case, to try to better understand why people behave in the ways they do. As Paul and Dan talk in this retrospective episode, you'll hear some excerpts from previous segments too. Paul himself hasn't lived with a physical disability or serious injury, but his own areas of research and expertise help us reflect more deeply and understand better how we might face our profound challenges and setbacks with an ultimate goal of sustained motivation and sense of happiness.
Paul, thanks a lot for having me here.
Hey, welcome.
I have to say, this is such a beautiful home, and I saw your office, and from seeing your office, I wouldn't have expected it to be so clean and organized. And
we've cleaned it up for you, Dan.
Oh, thank you. We started this series because there was a guy who called me up who was very badly injured and he wanted to talk. And we talked weekly about trying to find happiness in life. And he was paralyzed from the neck down. This was a little over a year after his initial injury, when it was clear to him that he was not going to get better. He wanted to talk about how to find happiness in life. He hated all these books that said that the injury was the best thing that ever happened to them. And we agreed that he would write a book against that, about the true nature of injury. And for the next 4 months, we would talk about once a week. And he made some progress on the book, not so much progress on the other. And then 4 months into it, he did commit suicide.
Wow.
So this for me was one of the catalysts for doing this. And I started wondering why he gave up and what caused some people to give up and some people to continue. We started this project partly as a search for trying to understand what gives us happiness and meaning and the ability to sustain adversity. So we all have adversity in all kinds of ways. And when do we give up and when do we persist? And what are some of the underlying mechanisms, social, environmental, personal, that helps us in this? And what kind of things can we do better? If you think about what we know in terms of adaptation and pleasure, are there principles that you think are applicable for people with substantial injuries?
So somebody like Dan Gilbert would say to these people, if you put it really crudely, you'll get used to it.
Here Paul's referring to Harvard professor Dan Gilbert, a researcher of social psychology and decision-making.
Yeah. You'll get, something terrible has happened. This is extremely shocking to you. This is a big blow to you. Your life is really a mess now, but you will adjust. They're going to benefit from some basic psychological phenomena like adaptation and habituation. You will get used to the bad things, you will compensate, and so on.
So, I've talked to Dan Gilbert about this at length many times, and we disagree. His basic argument is you ask people who are not injured how happy you are, and they're 8 on a 10-point scale. Somebody gets injured, you wait a year, you ask them how happy they are, and they're an 8-point on a 10-point scale as well. And he said nothing happened. And Dan Gilbert interprets this as it's all a prediction bias, that you think you'll be miserable, but in fact, you're just the same. And I don't feel like this. I was very badly injured a long time ago. If you ask me how happy I am, I'm 8 on a 10-point scale, right? So it's not that I disagree with his numerical estimation, but at the same time, if you ask me how much of my personal wealth would I give up not to have this injury, or you ask me how many years would I cut from my life not to have this injury, or you ask me how many hours a day would I stand in the snow not to have the rest of the pain that I'm feeling every day, you would get a very different answer. And the answer you would get from those things would tell you that I'm really miserable. Now, what Dan is saying is that I'm wrong.
Yes, Dan would say you're mistaken.
That in fact, my willingness to give part of my wealth and die sooner and stand in the snow for hours a week is a mistake. That my 8 is the true statement and everything else is a mistake. It's not just my impression. So we did studies on this. So we looked at people with different injuries and we asked them these questions about, dying earlier and experiencing pain on Monday to prevent the pain of the rest of the week. And we asked questions about how much wealth you would give. So we asked them all these questions about what decisions you make. And it's not just me. People in general say that they will sacrifice a lot to get rid of their injuries. And also these sacrifices are systematic. When people are injured younger, they're willing to give up more. When people are injured later, they're willing to give less. People who are injured more so they kind of respond sensibly to the economic variables of injury. So I think they represent something.
So it has the flavor of a paradox, which is on the one hand, people with severe injuries say sincerely that they're very happy, but on the other hand, reasonably enough, they say, I would give a lot to avoid having this injury. And plainly, my intuition was if I was to become blind or paralyzed or whatever, even though I could grant maybe I would be happy at the end of it, the way I am now, I certainly wouldn't want to be in that state, and I would act to avoid it. So they both can't be true.
They both can't be the same type of happiness, at least.
Yes. Because if it were true, to the extent it's true that you're rational, say, to pay to avoid having the difficulties you have now, that implies, if you use the same scale, that should somebody give you that chance, you'd then be at an 11 or something. You would be even happier than you are now. But maybe there's some truth about you'll always be an 8.
Yeah. So where do you come on this?
I don't. I like the idea of different sorts of happiness. I know our friend Dan would rebel against this, but I think that there's multiple things that come under the name happiness. There's day-to-day pleasures and pains. And then there's an overall satisfaction of one's life. And it might be, for instance, there's different ways of spelling out the solution to this, but it might be that, if my leg hurts, I can still be happy with my life. But day to day, each moment is, I lose a little bit. I can't walk the same way, I can't hike and everything like that. And that an intervention to help my leg would improve the day-to-day pleasures while leaving my general satisfaction of my life unchanged.
Part of it is what is the meaning of 10?
Yeah.
Right, so my sense is that my 10 is different. So my 10 doesn't include life without daily pain, for example.
Yeah.
And I think it's true for the people that we've talked to in this series is that overall they seem very happy, resilient and successful. And when you talk to them, they're an 8 or 9 or the 10. But I think it's also true, at the same time, it's also true that their definition of what a 10 is very different.
I don't mind being blind. In fact, it's given me some real gifts. I think there's a way in which people relate to me at their best when I'm traveling. And I think I've learned something about listening to people and sort of processing the places where I got hurt. And having a chance to go back and work through them has really helped me to feel very pleased with my life and how I fit in the society. People have often asked me if they could do something today that might succeed in giving you sight, but you might also lose your light perception. Would you do it? And I used to say, undoubtedly yes, because I want to experience as much as I can. But you know, now my identity is, this is who I am. And I've read and heard from people who've tried those early experiments, how disorienting it was and how they just needed to close their eyes and go back to being blind for certain parts of the day just to feel normal for a while. I don't know now. I love my life, and there's a part of me like, I'm not sure I would mess with it.
And I think both of those things somehow exist, that I do feel that I'm an 8, but I do feel that there's a lot of things I would have changed.
There's a debate in philosophy, actually, among disability advocates and people around them who argue that the things that somebody like me would see as a disability, like being deaf or blind, are actually not so bad. And they'll speak to happiness researchers that we're talking about and say, these people say they're perfectly happy. Who are you to say otherwise?
Yes.
And I have to be sensitive to the data. But I also have to say, well, if you could recover your mobility on your left side, your life would be better in some tangible way. And I don't know whether it'll move you from 8 to an 8.8. In some objective sense, your life would be better. What makes an injury bad? Because you could imagine different things. One thing, it could be simply pain is one thing. Yeah. A second thing is the effect it has on your physical life, your ability to move and care for yourself. And a third is how others respond to it.
Yeah.
And if you were trying to do a sort of a continuum of problems and injuries from best to worst, what do you think has the most predictive power?
I think that pain is the worst.
Yeah.
I think pain, and little pain is okay, but when I have very painful days, I feel like I'm a pain person.
Yeah.
Like my day is dedicated to pain, and it's a filter that changes the day. Then the health issues are negative, but you learn to deal with it, right? So it could be worse, it could be better. That there's a range.
Yes. And think about your average 90-year-old. Your average 90-year-old is physically has serious health issues.
That's right.
Low mobility, but often could be tremendously happy person.
That's right. And society, that one has huge variance. I think for some of the people we've talked to, it's very tough.
Yeah.
It's very tough, and it's particularly tough for people who need to meet new people all the time and are continuously reminded of their differences and continuously have to explain it or say something and continuously fear that they are falling into stereotypes or that people think that they are something else because of their injuries that are associated mental challenges or all kinds of other things. But I think it's one of those things that you could think in advance, do you want that fight?
Yes.
And I salute the people who want that fight, but at the same time, it's a real fight if you choose to have it.
To me, it goes back to the acknowledgement. I never used to acknowledge someone looking at me.
So this guy, for example, just kind of actively look the other way to avoid...
Yeah, that guy's an asshole. No, I don't know.
You know him personally?
Now when I do, I try to say, hey, that lets them know that I see them looking at me, I see them.
And that also you're human, you're capable of human sounds.
And it's a very simple, sort of basic human interaction that says, I'm here and I see you. I mean, ideally, I'd be like, hi, would you like to go out to dinner with me? You know, like, that would be nice.
That would be tiring.
Yeah.
I think hey might be.
I've eaten 6 times today.
Yeah. So, Paul, we sat in your lovely dining room, and now we moved outside.
We have whiskey in front of us.
We have whiskey in front of us, and this beautiful pond.
You hear the wild geese?
I hear the geese. The pond is amazing.
It's nice out here. It's a great place to talk. So you pose all these hard puzzles, but you raised something as a puzzle, which didn't seem like a puzzle at all. You said, why do you put yourself through this? These encounters with people who are in a lot of pain, a lot of suffering, difficult life circumstances, and it has its negative effects on you. It's hard, a lot harder than some other work you've done. But the answer to that is you think it's a worthy project. You know, people are willing to. We skip the obvious reason why people expose themselves and encounter suffering and feel bad. It's instrumental. They do so because it's the way to a greater good. And you have some greater goods in mind. So I guess with that in mind, what I want to ask you is, suppose something bad was going to happen to me. Suppose I was to become paralyzed or blind or mentally troubled or something like that. What sort of person should I be? What would be what personality characteristics would best equip me to cope?
Humor is very effective for me. It's the only reason I think I'm still standing.
I think humor is it's a very interesting tool. There's also there's a lot of dark humor for all kinds of things, and that humor can almost not be repeated outside of that group.
Right. I think you're right. My son had told me something which just made me roll with laughter. And the name of my book is called Now I See You. And he said, you should write a sequel in like 10, 20 years. And you should call it Now I Don't. I repeated this joke to one of my students recently, and she was horrified. I mean, she was really perturbed. And that was the first time I thought, oh, it has a different effect when you're inside of the experience versus for someone who's outside of the experience. But part of the humor's value to me and in my family at least is it aids being open about things.
It's hard being in this body. Like, it's incredibly difficult on a daily basis. It's anxiety-ridden. It makes me not want to be around people. It makes me not want to be around myself. I don't know if I'm ever going to truly accept it. Right? Yeah. Maybe a better word is acknowledgement. Mm-hmm. Like, if I can acknowledge this to myself, if I can acknowledge it to someone else, like a loved one or a coworker or whoever, like, it's the act of acknowledgement. I think that's different from acceptance. That's been harder. The act of acknowledgement is something that I've found incredibly difficult, and that's something that I have to practice. I don't think I'm ever going to truly accept having a disability. There's always going to be a part of me that's like, if not for this thing, I would be able to do this and this and this and this and this. But what can I do? Like, I can't, it's not going to go away. So I either have to find a way to deal with it that helps me get through my day and helps me live fulfilling relationships in my life, or I'm going to be lost.
I don't want to tell you like my resume and why I belong in this world and how great my life is, or, you know, I was eating at a fast food place and some guy came over and said, you know, I feel so sorry for you. I just really, you know, I think if I were blind, I'd want to kill myself. I was like, wait a minute, you have no idea. Like, you know, then I start like saying, look, I've been to college, I've lived in Paris for a year. You end up trying to like justify your own existence by saying, you know, I don't think I would trade with you. I wouldn't trade with you.
Yeah.
And but to have that every once in a while when you're just like really feeling great, have these reminders. But I just know there are just so many blessings that I have in terms of my wife, art and music, and there's just so many things. I hope that I go out kicking and screaming.
Something that I used to do before my injury and I'm trying to do now is getting people back out in the woods and on bikes like mine. And I didn't really understand it until last year when a friend of mine put that in perspective, what I used to do before my injury and why I'm doing what I'm doing now. It's because I want people to share in what I love. Nature is healing. Just doing the thing that you love, never mind just nature, but doing the thing that you love and finding a place for yourself is healing. So if I can get people that, even if they weren't a mountain biker before, if I can get them out of their chairs and doing something that's different from what they know every day and get them out of that feeling of being trapped in their body and trapped in a wheelchair or trapped in some sort of apparatus that they don't feel as though that they belong. Seeing patients that are newly injured again kind of brings a lot of that back. You see the hard times that they're going through, and for good, you see, wow, I've come this far. 5 years now, I am not
a rookie at this anymore.
Yeah, I'm not lost like I was.
Presumably you feel that you can help them think about how to make their lives better.
That's definitely something that gives me a lot of purpose.
I think developing some sense of control is important. One of the things I hated and still hate the most about hospital is the feeling of helplessness, that other people decide when to wake you up and when to take your blood and when to operate on you. And so kind of being active and taking control is important. Learning to enjoy pain.
So you're being purposely provocative.
No.
You know, I had a backache earlier this morning. My back hurt. I could take some pills. I could learn to ignore it and everything like that to enjoy it.
I think back pain is tough to enjoy because it's very hard to attribute a positive signal to it. But I think easier pains are pains of treatment.
Yes.
Or physical therapy. So think about massage.
Yes.
These things are painful.
Yeah.
Right? And we mentioned mountain climbing or running a marathon. You know, nobody's smiling while doing those things.
Yes. It's interesting. I mean, that way of thinking suggests that suddenly physical therapy is a sort of pain that could be valuable, even enjoyable, because you're doing it. You're straining the muscles. Well, if you're lying passively and there's a treatment being done upon you, it's harder.
Not the same.
It's harder to get it because there's no feeling of accomplishment you could link to it because you're not doing anything.
And physical therapy at least is connected with getting better. So even the passive one,
that's right,
I think is more positive. Where things like pain of surgery or removing bandages, it's very hard to figure out why this is helpful. Another thing I would say is that have this capacity to enjoy competition.
Really?
And it's not a competition with others. It could be a competition with yourself. But I think competition is basically this ability to find joy in improving, in learning things. You know, even cooking, right? Just learning how to cook something. People who do something with the intention to get better and better. People who run and time themselves. People who are trying to meditate and measure how many minutes. Basically develop this skill to find little things that make you happy and give you a chance to improve and measure your improvement and find joy in that.
I like that. I like it in part because it's genuinely surprising. That's not your sort of standard list of positive traits, a competitive spirit. People say, no, you should be happy, you should be satisfied. But you're saying develop the capacity to be dissatisfied with something you're doing, to want to go to the next step, and to enjoy the process of improvement.
Yeah.
I was thinking what you said before about pain, because you said this was the major problem. And I sometimes think that the problem in America, the major problem isn't ISIS, it's not our government, it's pain. The opioid crisis is enormous.
Yeah.
And it has all sorts of causes. But part of it is just everyday pain from physical work, maybe from complicated sources that are hard to pin down, and a need to medicate ourselves, and then spirals.
Yeah.
And it's all great when you're not feeling pain to be able to look and say, how strange, and I would never do that. But then just to get a taste of it makes you realize how pain can take over everything.
Yeah.
And the relief of pain can be so blissful.
There was another lesson. There was a guy who told me that it took him 800 times to learn how to put his pants on. This was a guy who was paralyzed from the waist down. And he said that number gave him tremendous comfort, where he basically said, I know things can get better,
yes,
but some things I just need to do 800 times. And kind of having this ability to see improvement, even if you don't see them in a daily basis, right? So there are many things in life that you just have to have patience, particularly with illness. Improvement is very slow. And you need to develop this perspective that even if you don't see the improvement, like life is simple when you can see the improvement every day. But what if you don't see the improvement? How does that work? So let me turn the question to you. So if you were going to design the characteristics of somebody who would be able to sustain adversity and thrive, what would those be?
I think people differ to the extent to which they have control over their emotions, where they could step back. I have a lot of respect for people who engage in meditative practices, but more generally than that, people who can control their temper, control their lust, their sorrow, and step back and say, sometimes life is a problem to be solved. And to some extent, pain and handicap and indignity of medical treatment robs us of the ability to step back and treat things rationally. And I think a sense of humor is one manifestation of establishing distance on things, to be able to look at your predicament and you're not deeply inside it, but you're stepping back from it to see some of the comic aspects of it.
Yeah.
Stepping back on it to think, this will make a damn good story one day.
This question about reflecting on life, to some degree, if we go back to one of the reasons we started this, which is this guy that committed suicide, reflecting on life can be a two-edged sword.
I don't know whether there's any correlation between asking the big questions and being unhappy.
I think asking is different than kind of having, defining yourself by your ability to find that, or feeling that you've lost it.
Yeah. So I did research with this wonderful student, Coney Banerjee, on intuitions about fate, the idea things happen for a reason. And we find two things of interest. First, the appetite to find reasons for things, sort of cosmic purposes, is so powerful that even most people who self-identify as atheists still say, yeah, but things happen for a reason. And they go on to say things, they balance out, they go to teach you lessons, they make you a better person, they so on. And then we also find that children show more of a bias towards this belief in fate or karma than adults do, suggesting that for some of us, it gets beaten out of us.
And do you think it's a coping mechanism? Or is it that you don't want to believe in randomness because the life, if a bad thing happened for a random reason, it can happen again tomorrow?
Yeah, so there's two takes on it. One is that it exists sort of for a palliative reason to make us feel better about ourselves. The other way, it could be a byproduct of a more general cognitive system that we've both been interested in, which is to see sort of agency and goals and motivations in everything. And so we're basically, it's as if we have this overactive theory of mind, social cognition. So just as when you see an animal and you assume it must have been created because its form gives rise to the idea, well, it's so elegantly structured to fit the environment. How could this happen without some sort of agent behind it? Yeah. We see this with events as well. You know, a lightning bolt comes and destroys my car, and I say, wow, wonder what that was for.
Yeah. If a dog has a disability, they're not too concerned about it.
Right.
It's counterfactual thinking, and it's about what did I do wrong and who do I blame, and
philosophers make the distinction. They say, you know, a dog, a baby could feel pain, but only a person can suffer. And suffering involves ruminating on your problems.
Yeah.
Dreading them, thinking about the future, thinking what could have been.
So would you recommend that if you're about to have a serious injury, should we reduce your ability to ruminate?
That's a really good question. I can go both ways on that. Like
because in some sense, it's the essence of life is to reflect on it. If you're not reflecting on anything, what's the point of continuing? Reflection,
properly used, could be your means of escape, your means of recovery, your mechanism of resilience, where you say, you know, this is where I am now, but 5 years I'll be in a different place.
And the world will pass us by, but we never cared, nor you nor I.
I'm one of these people who believe that there at least can be two phases of research, and you know, the second phase could be the robust, careful experiments. But before you get to it, often you have to have a first phase where you explore, you ask questions, you interview people, you look carefully at the world, and it sounds like an incredibly valuable project. It's a tremendously important topic, and I'm really glad you're taking it on.
Gold, I see you like gold. Look back how far we've come. Please don't let go. Gold, no good on my own. Yours, I'll be only yours if we get through this storm. 'Cause I see you like gold.
The Upside of Down is hosted and executive produced by Dan Ariely. The episodes are produced and edited by DGC International and New Fruit Media, especially Luis Dectiar and Colby Goddard. Sound mixing by Ross Nelson, additional sound mixing, editing, and producing by Daniel Rinaldi. The theme song is A-OK by Cajuns. Additional music provided by Music Bed and Marie-Claire Sedon. I'm Robin Eldridge, and I created, produced, and directed the series. If you like what you heard, please pass it on.
Oh, gold, I see you like gold. Look back how far we've come. Please don't let go. Oh, gold, no good on my own. Yours, I'll be only yours if we get through this storm.
Oh, but gold, I see you like gold. Look back how far we've come. Please don't let go. Oh, gold, no good on my own. Yours, I